Hello, my friends, and welcome to the very first episode of Dreaming with Dusk, the podcast where we talk about anything and everything that my wildest dreams can conjure up. I'm your host, everybody's favorite cartoon giraffe on the internet, Dusk Till Sean, and I'd like to thank you so much for clicking on this video and for being here today. We have an excellent show, and you saw that right. You read that title correctly. Today, we are going to be talking about every single episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of it, though, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping and let you guys know what's going to be going on from this point forward. First things first, only episode 1 of this podcast is going to be here on my main channel. I honestly don't want to clog your feed too much, so episode 2 and every episode after that's going to be on a separate channel called Dreaming with Dusk. I'll link it in the description down below, so those of you who are true fans can go subscribe while I'm still working on the next episode. But what is Dreaming with Dusk? This is going to be an off-the-cuff, no-script, long-form podcast where we cover any subject that my heart desires at length. And it's the kind of thing where, to be honest, I don't really want to box myself in the corner of only talking about cartoons specifically. I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes we're going to talk about things like every episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog or what have you, but maybe sometimes we'll talk about random stuff like, I don't know, the history of mushrooms or like the best bridges ever constructed or something like that, I don't know. The point is, it's always meant to be raw and authentic, and I guess just kind of an in-depth info dump from your favorite cartoon giraffe on the internet. I want it to be kind of the perfect place where I can have fun and do whatever I want and, at the same time be able to update you guys with everything else that I've got going on in life. At that, I'd love to tell you guys about what I've been working on recently. I have been making my magnum opus. Seriously, one of my favorite videos that I've ever made, and I've worked so hard on this one and had such a great time doing it. I literally cried laughing so many times while drawing this one and while editing it, and it just turned out so insanely good. I put a lot of really hard work into it, and in my opinion, it's just so hilarious, and I'm really proud of how it came out. With that being said, that video is dropping this upcoming Friday morning here on my main channel, so please, it would mean a lot to me if you would show up and check it out, because this one is really, it's just one that means so much to me. Don't get me wrong, it's a deep dive into an episode of Rugrats. It's got that normal Dusk Till Sean episode review in there, but it's so much more than that at the same time. I am still just in shock that I made this video and that it turned into what it did and that I made it all by myself, except for a couple extra voices from my wife. But yeah, it's so good. But make sure, please, to come back on Friday so that you can check it out. It would definitely mean a lot to me, like I said. With like a little more than 3 minutes of housekeeping out of the way, though, let's get right into it. Let's talk about Courage the Cowardly Dog. To be honest, I couldn't think of a better way to start out this podcast. When it came to approaching my YouTube channel many, many years ago, 6 years ago to be exact, so I guess not that long, but still, my first video that I ended up talking about cartoons in particular was a video about Courage the Cowardly Dog. I think it was like a top 10 or top 5 video, the greatest episodes. And it's crazy to think back to how different my approach to videos was back then and kind of how shallowly, I guess, I approached it versus my in-depth approach to shows now. I don't know. It's kind of cool to reminisce on the past days of my channel. And at that, in the spirit of kind of continuing that energy, I thought it'd be pretty sick to do Courage the Cowardly Dog for my very first subject on this podcast. If you're watching this, though, I mean, come on, I gotta assume you already know what Courage the Cowardly Dog is. Like, part of me wants to introduce the show and kind of let people know what it was about. But also, if you clicked on this video and you don't know Courage or you're not familiar at all, I'd be kind of shocked, to be honest. For a brief rundown, though, Courage the Cowardly Dog is a cartoon that aired on Cartoon Network from, 1999 all the way to 2002. This show would see 4 seasons that would have 52 episodes total, and of those 52 episodes, they'd be split into 102 segments total. This show played into a lot of paranormal and supernatural themes, and it was known for having a really dark and surreal sense of humor and atmosphere in general. Taking place in the town of Nowhere, Kansas, the show followed Courage, the cowardly dog, voiced by Marty Grabstein, who was a kind but easily scared beagle. Abandoned as a pup, he was found by Muriel, voiced by the late great Thea White, who was a caring and sweet old woman who would take Courage under her wing and do her best to protect him at all costs. Ultimately, though, if you're familiar with the show, of course, it would end up being Courage who protects her at all costs in nearly every episode. Muriel lives on a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere with her husband, Eustace Bagg, who was voiced by Lionel Wilson for episodes 1 through 33, and then Arthur Anderson for episodes 34 through 52. Now, Eustace was like the complete opposite of Muriel. He was a greedy, cranky jerk who was always really jealous of Courage and wanted to be in the limelight no matter what it took. He was an abusive dog owner and a total piece of garbage, and Lionel Wilson and Arthur Anderson both did an amazing job of bringing his character to light. They gave so much life to this character, as did every other voice actor that featured in the show, and it's really crazy to look back and realize that Thea White, Lionel Wilson, Arthur Anderson, all of them have passed away, and now those roles are left without voice actors. Granted, the show isn't still going. There almost was a reboot with that CGI The Fog of Courage short that was made many years ago. And then, of course, a couple of years back, they did the straight out of nowhere Scooby-Doo meets Courage the Cowardly Dog crossover. Which, that one saw, who was it? It was Jeff Bergman. That's right, Jeff Bergman did the voice of Eustace and the computer in that movie. Thea White was able to come back as Muriel because that came out before she had passed away. But still, it's really insane to think that Marty Grabstein is the only one left of the original core voice cast. And even he, if I recall correctly, had a bit of a health scare, I think it was earlier this year or last year. Man, it's crazy how fast time goes by. I mean, this show, having aired in 1991, it's almost 30 years old now, and it's just mind-blowing to see the passing of time and these characters passing away, and in a sense, the torch being passed. I mean, Jeff Bergman getting the opportunity to play Eustace really does feel like a full circle passing down the torch moment for my inner childhood, considering he was the first person to replace Mel Blanc as the voice of Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and a bunch of the other Looney Tunes characters back in 1989 after Mel Blanc had passed away. With that being said, though, I mean, if you see Marty Grabstein, the voice of Courage the Cowardly Dog, coming to a convention near you anytime in the future, I might consider meeting him if he can, because he is a legendary voice actor and at this point is the last man standing of the original cast. I mean, don't get me wrong, we still have like Simon Preble who played the computer, or Paul Schaefer who played Dr. Vindaloo, or of course Mary Testa who was the iconic Shirley the Medium. But still, those weren't characters that were in every episode like Eustace and Muriel, or Courage, of course. Outside of the voice cast, the show was created by John R. Dilworth, who, I mean, this guy has quite the creative imagination and definitely a good sense for what makes a good cartoon if I've ever seen it. He's worked on so many different projects, and his works have appeared across many networks from like Showtime and HBO to, of course, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, or even Comedy Central and MTV. But of his many works, Courage the Cowardly Dog would be probably the biggest standout of them all. And it all started with his animated short, The Chicken from Outer Space, which, surprisingly enough, was nominated for an Academy Award. If I recall correctly, I believe I've made a video that covered this original pilot at least a little bit at some point. This one would drop on February 18th of 1996 as a segment of What a Cartoon, and it would see Courage being scared out of the house by Eustace, and shortly after, a UFO would end up landing in the front yard. Courage is completely horrified, so of course he goes to get Eustace and Muriel, and when they get back, of course the spacecraft is gone, as well as its captain, the red-eyed, evil chicken alien. This pilot was incredibly iconic, and it was full of all sorts of hijinks, and by the end of it, the evil chicken from outer space ends up being turned into a roasted chicken from outer space. And if I recall correctly, that roasted chicken actually comes back for revenge in the actual series past this pilot. After the pilot, though, we would see the very first episode of the show, A Night at the Cat's Motel. So this episode came out on November 12th of 1999, and it's without a doubt one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. First things first, the title card, dude. It's got Courage sitting there looking terrified in front of a spider web, and it's got the logo for Cat's Motel looking like a hotel sign. It's just so incredibly iconic. As far as the actual episode goes, it would see Courage, Muriel, and Eustace stopping at the Cat's Motel to end their vacation for the night, but sadly for them, it's not a nice hotel by any means. It's really just Katz's perfect excuse for finding unlimited food to keep his giant pet spiders happy. Legitimately, this whole episode sees Katz trying to have his spiders eat Courage and Eustace and Muriel. Which just, it makes for the most gnarly, gut-wrenching scenes if you're somebody who has arachnophobia. The way they drew these spiders with their backsides all just huge and bulbous and their legs all spindly, but their faces tiny and pointy at the same time, it's just crazy. It's really creative and original, and I love it, but it also terrified me as a kid at the same time. It was an excellent episode, and in my opinion was a great way to start off the series on a really strong note. Katz made for a very iconic antagonist, and he's one that I was really happy to see return to the show many times throughout its run. After that, though, was another one of my all-time favorite episodes, none other than Cajun Granny Stew, which premiered on December 17th of 1999. This episode sees Muriel at the park one day feeding some birds and just kind of enjoying a nice mellow time when a sneaky fox comes out of nowhere trying to take her and use her for the main ingredient in his Cajun Granny Stew, which is hoping will win him first prize in some sort of contest. My favorite part about this one, without a doubt, has to be the animation of the fox. The way they drew his eyes, just all huge and crazy, pointed in different directions, but then when he puts on his little tiny sunglasses, the eyes disappear. It's just, it's the greatest animation trick ever, and I love it. It makes for such a hilarious gag, and ultimately, very iconic episode. Next up, though, we're looking at the Shadow of Courage. Which, I mean, I could call this one an iconic episode, but I'd feel like a broken record if we're being honest. But with that being said, I mean, that's kind of the same for all of the early on episodes of this series. They just all feel so iconic and nostalgic in their own right. The Shadow of Courage would originally air on November 19th of 1999, and this one would see a wealthy old miser dying alone in his observatory when he releases his playful shadow who plays tricks on all the people of nowhere. Ultimately, though, it ends up staying the night on Eustace and Muriel's farm and messing with them as Courage tries to figure out what it is that the shadow really wants to get it to go away. In the long run, this one would come to a pretty hilarious ending with the shadow revealing that it's not even really evil and that it doesn't want to be a bad guy. It actually just wants to be the shadow of a big show star. Courage ends up turning the shadow into a star in the sky, apparently, and to be honest, it's odd to say that I kind of feel like I don't remember this episode. I don't know, maybe it's one worth rewatching and maybe making a video about. Especially because I'm pretty sure Courage the Cowardly Dog is on Tubi now. Shout out Tubi for being awesome and having Courage the Cowardly Dog. Let's see, next up on the list we have Dr. LeQuack, Amnesia Specialist, and this is one that I definitely remember. This episode premiered on November 19th of 1999, and it would see Eustace attempting to fix the roof, but accidentally sending a wooden plank flying through the air and onto Muriel's head, which gives her amnesia. Rather than trying to fix the problem, Eustace of course convinces her that she's a slave. Meanwhile, Courage seeks some help, eventually reaching for Dr. LeQuack, a self-proclaimed amnesia specialist. Surprise, surprise, though, Dr. LeQuack is a total quack, just trying to steal all their valuables and make off being the scam artist that he is. And of course, it's up to Courage to stop him from doing that. Honestly, one of the biggest things that I remember from this one is just how hilarious that Dr. LeQuack is, in the sense that he's so overly dramatic and theatrical. Just his overall mannerisms and the way that he talks and acts. It's interesting because I've given the Powerpuff Girls endless praise for how great that their villains were written in comparison to like the main characters themselves. And to a degree, that's another kind of praise that Courage the Cowardly Dog deserves. However, the main characters themselves were also written well, so the point doesn't land as hard, but still, the villains in this show were just incredible. After that was none other than Courage Meets Bigfoot, which I definitely remember. However, I'm having a hard time recalling if I remember seeing the premiere of this one. Originally, the official air date of this episode was November 26th of 1999, but apparently it aired on August 21st of 1999 as a sneak peek. That would have been just a couple days after my 5th birthday, and actually that would have been my wife's 5th birthday because we were born a couple days apart from one another. But I swear, somewhere deep in the recesses of my brain, it feels like I can remember seeing this episode during the sneak peek. But I don't know, maybe I'm just making up memories here. Regardless though, this episode sees Courage noticing strange things happening in the middle of nowhere and finding a large footprint suggesting the presence of a Sasquatch. Of course, Courage ends up stumbling upon Bigfoot and being terrified, only to find out that it's actually a friendly creature. Meanwhile, Eustace is trying to hunt the poor thing down and turn it in for money. In the end, though, of course, it would be none other than Bigfoot's mother who shows up to take him home. This one was an excellent episode, and I really liked the way that they presented Bigfoot. He was just so, hilariously childish, but at the same time large and scary looking. It was a great contradiction, and it made for a really funny dynamic between him and Courage. The next one, though, oh man, this episode, it really changed how I look at Eustace in a way. I remember seeing this as a little kid, and honestly, it made Eustace kind of freak me out just a bit. None other than the episode Hothead, which aired on November 26th of 1999. This one would see Eustace reading an ad in the newspaper and going to a testing facility to try out a new hair tonic that'll hopefully grow his hair. The product they end up making him try, though, ends up turning him explosively angry whenever he gets mad. Literally exploding. This episode's a funny one because there's not necessarily a villain per se, it's just Eustace being incredibly angry and his anger being more dangerous than it usually is. God, the way they drew Eustace with his eyes bulging out of his head and those veins in his angry, empty sockets where his teeth are supposed to be, it's just so menacing and creepy. But I love this episode regardless of how freaky they made him look. It's funny too, because it's one of those where there's absolutely nothing Courage can do to save the day. By the end of it all, Eustace's anger ends up still exploding their house, but, at least him and Muriel live to see another day, right? The episode that came after that, though, I'm pretty sure was the first one that, genuinely terrified me as a kid. I have memories of this shocking me to my core and really just leaving me having nightmares. That'd be none other than The Demon in the Mattress, which aired on December 3rd of 1999. This one would see Muriel ordering a special mattress so that she can finally get a comfortable night of sleep. But when the mattress arrives, it comes from this weird old carriage that's drawn by horses, and it's brought in by a weird pair of, rodent creature things. And the mattress has a demon in it. Of course, the demon ends up taking over Muriel and possessing her, and it's up to Courage and Eustace to save the day and exorcise the demon from her body. I don't know though, man. For me, when I was a kid, the idea of being possessed by a demon, or not even myself being possessed, but having to deal with somebody else who's possessed by a demon just scared the ever-loving shit out of me. I mean, the idea of that happening from a mattress being brought into your home, or I guess any item being brought into your home really, but like you're ordering a mattress to sleep comfortably and next thing you know you're taken over by a demon. I don't know. Stuff like that just terrifies me, but regardless, this one made for such an iconic episode that absolutely burned my childhood brain with endless fear. As did the next episode, none other than Freaky Fred, which aired on December 3rd, 1999. This is one that I recently made a video about sometime within the last couple months, and I know I've talked about it a few years ago as well, but it is just such an iconic episode. This is the one where Muriel's nephew Fred comes to visit the farmhouse on vacation. However, it turns out he's actually insane, escaped from the mental hospital, and is now in their house terrorizing Courage in the bathroom, shaving him completely bare because he has a compulsion to remove hair. The whole story is told through voices in his head, which rhyme, and it's just really a heavy implication that Fred is crazy, and it's a type of energy that they just capture in such a specific and really eerie way. God, just such a good episode though. Very, very terrifying when you're a little kid. After Freaky Fred, though, we would be treated to none other than Night of the Weremole, which premiered on December 17th of 1999. And it saw a ravenous mole-like werewolf biting Muriel and turning her into a weremole too. Of course, the episode would see Courage and Eustace going out of their way to try to reverse this curse and stop the weremole once and for all. But along the way, they would recruit the help of Dr. Vindaloo, and this would actually be his first appearance in the series, interestingly enough. This one might actually be one of my favorite episodes he was in too, especially because that scene where he gets turned into a weremole and we see the Dr. Vindaloo weremole. It's so funny. Apparently, too, a little bit of trivia for you. There's some countries where the scene where the weremole bites Muriel actually got censored and was cut out of the episode for some reason. But yeah, that one was a really good episode. And so was the one that was packaged with it as well, actually. The second part of this one was none other than Mother's Day, which of course came out the same day, December 17th, 1999. And this one would be the episode that introduced Eustace's mother, who would be a recurring character throughout like the entire series, oddly enough only appearing in like a handful of episodes, but like the effect that she has on Eustace and the show in general makes her feel like a lot more of a recurring character in a sense. But yeah, this is the one where Eustace goes to visit his mom on Mother's Day and Courage gets dragged along with him. And of course, Eustace's mom pretty much only pays attention to Courage the entire time, leaving Eustace feeling neglected and like her being the person that she is, she's judging him the entire time as well, and just being a massive jerk to him. This is an episode that I always feel mixed about, to be honest, because I like it. Like, it's a quality episode and there's a lot going on here. But I just hate Ma Bag so much, and she drags down nearly any episode that she's featured in. I will admit it was interesting, though, to have this episode kind of be a full circle moment and revealing that Eustace's mom is abusive and has been since he was a little kid. So, with that being said, it kind of makes sense as to why Eustace is the person that he is. He bullies Courage because he's really just kind of perpetuating what his mother does to him. It's kind of ironic because you'd think with him growing up the way that he did, he wouldn't want to be like his mother when he was an adult, but apparently the apple just sometimes falls a little too close to the tree. But yeah, outside of that though, it's interesting to think that this was the very last episode that aired in 1999. And it's also one of very few episodes where there's no like supernatural phenomenon happening or no monster or something attacking. It's one of the first episodes where Courage doesn't really have like a monster to face. He's just kind of dealing with everybody's shit that they've got happening around him. It's also kind of complex in the sense that, like, this one can be seen as a lighthearted episode because there's no monster or ghost attacking them, but we're still tackling topics like child abuse and having a troubled childhood in general and perpetuating the kind of cycles that you grew up with that were very toxic for you. I don't know. It's one that kind of walks an awkward line, but the one after that, on the other hand, would be none other than the Duck Brothers, which would be a quintessential episode of this series. Despite the production order, this one actually aired before the last one on December 10th of 1999. And it would see Muriel getting abducted by a pair of intergalactic duck brothers from space who have a plan to rescue their brother. All in all, it's kind of a lighthearted story, to be honest, and in the end, we end up learning that the brothers aren't really that evil at all. They just want to save their brother, and that's it. Courage ends up helping them, and everything ends up good in the end, I think, at least from what I remember. But ultimately, it's an episode that, looking back at least, it feels a lot more lighthearted, at least, than the Mother's Day episode, because it wasn't that controversial of a topic. Plus, the Duck Brothers feel a lot different from any other villain in this show. They feel a lot more harmless and just kind of silly, to be honest. Apparently, though, there was a rumor going around regarding this episode that Ringo Starr of the Beatles was the one that voiced the Duck Brothers, but apparently the creator of the show himself came out in an interview on YouTube confirming that it was definitely not Ringo Starr. It was a voice actor by the name of Will Ryan who was doing an imitation of Ringo Starr, which was what left people confused. He did a pretty good job, though, for being honest. The other great part about this episode, though, is that its pairing is like the perfect iconic episode duo. The episode that followed this one was none other than Shirley the Medium. Shirley would go on to be a beloved character for the fans, appearing across many episodes of the show, and ultimately she left a huge mark on us in her debut. This one would see Courage digging in the yard when he comes across a locked box that Eustace's brother Horst had buried a long time ago on their property. Eustace is under the impression that his brother's fortune is hidden in this little lockbox, so they end up hiring a medium to try to contact his brother from the afterlife to figure out where the key is. Shirley shows up and she channels Horst sure as day, but he doesn't want to tell Eustace where the key is. After some prodding, though, Eustace convinces him, realizing that the key was in the lining of his hat this entire time, and of course he opens the box to realize that there's just an evil pair of arms in there grabbing him. It's episodes like these that remind me just how great that Season 1 really is. Don't get me wrong, I love Courage as a whole, the entirety of the show is amazing, but Season 1 just had so many iconic episodes. I mean, Shirley the Medium was just fantastic. But, of course, after that, we had none other than King Ramsay's Curse. And I mean, come on, other than Freaky Fred, this is the one episode that everybody recognizes, and nearly any time a conversation about Courage the Cowardly Dog casually pops up, this is always the episode that people end up bringing up, saying was probably the one that freaked them out the most. I don't know, that's my experience at least. But yeah, this is the one where Courage finds that old Egyptian stone slab near their farmhouse that some, thieves had stolen from a museum or whatever, or from a pharaoh's tomb. I don't remember if they got it from a museum or directly from the tomb, but regardless, they end up hiding it near the farmhouse because they're being chased by cops, and Courage finds it, right? Eustace, of course, being the massive jerk that he is, takes the slab and is immediately, demanding money from anybody who's interested in it. Even King Ramses himself, the ghost of the pharaoh of whom the slab came from. The family has to face these 3 different curses of King Ramses, all the while Eustace stubbornly refuses to give the slab back, which, of course, would fix this entire situation. Of course, really the most frightening and memorable part of this episode being King Ramses' ghost himself, which would really be the one big striking element that landed with so many people and left so many kids with nightmares. It was a really good episode, and I don't remember if I already said this, but it premiered on January 7th of the year 2000, being the first episode to premiere that year, alongside none other than The Clutching Foot. And this is an episode that I like, don't get me wrong, it's interesting, but the whole foot aspect and how gross they drew it just really, it struck me as a kid. I even still, to this day, I have a hard time looking at it. This one pretty much sees a foot covered in fungus, which manifests itself in the form of gangsters taking over Eustace's entire body and taking Muriel hostage, forcing Courage to carry out their work. This giant mobster foot is forcing Courage to rob banks and stuff, saying that if he doesn't, then the fat lady gets it. This episode is an interesting one because I know this wasn't the very first appearance of Courage's computer, But this is the first appearance of Courage's computer that I, actually full-blown remember in detail. Courage ends up using, a fishing line with a hook to grab a piece of the foot's flesh, and he ends up bringing it to his computer and putting it inside of the disk drive so it can analyze it and help him figure out, what to do to get rid of it. Of course, the only cure being dog spit, leaving Courage to have to lick the foot to get Eustace back to normal. But I don't know, to be honest, I think it's the grotesque nature of which the computer was involved that really made me remember this as the computer's first real appearance. The episode after this one, though, is one that just has such a particular vibe to it, and I really love it. It's none other than The Hunchback of Nowhere, and this one premiered on January 14th of the year 2000. It sees this lonely hunchback going door to door in the rain, hoping for a place to crash for the night when he stumbles upon the farm. Eustace slams the door in his face, telling him to go away, but the guy ends up helping himself to the barn, and Courage makes friend with him, ultimately gaining him the ability to sleep in their barn overnight. It's one of those episodes that does have a really dark and gloomy and rainy kind of aesthetic, but the creepy looking character isn't the bad guy. This time it's actually the good guy, and Eustace is the bad guy, which is a nice change of pace for the show. It was a nice story about not judging a book by its cover and, always taking the time to analyze somebody's personality before judging them just at face value. Now, the one that accompanied this one, though, it's kind of weird because I swear I can remember this one being a later episode, maybe season 3 or so, but apparently it was season 1, episode 8, part 2. This episode was The Gods Must Be Goosey, and it came out January 14th, 2000. This one sees a lonely goose god descending from the heavens above and falling in love with Muriel, trying to make her his queen and take her with him. It follows Eustace and Courage trying to help Muriel realize that her place is here on the farm and not up in the heavens with this goose. I don't know, to be honest, this episode never really stuck out to me too much, but apparently this is the first non-pilot episode where Eustace uses his mask to scare Courage. Which, to me personally, that's kind of mind-blowing because, again, I thought this was a later episode, but I apparently am mistaken. The next episode that followed, though, definitely is a classic that really embodies that creepy season 1 aesthetic. That would be none other than Queen of the Black Puddle. This one is just mind-blowingly creepy. It sees Eustace being seduced by this weird water spirit who keeps trying to lure him into any source of water, be it the water in the shower or the toilet or whatever. He's just completely infatuated with the lure of this siren, and he ends up being taken down to her lair, leaving Muriel heartbroken, thinking that Eustace left her for another woman. Courage ends up diving to the bottom of this deep black puddle to save Eustace, and along the way, we end up seeing this goth mommy siren lady who almost looks kind of Elvira-esque originally, being exposed to actually be some crazy monster that has this massive protruding underjaw and everything. It's totally creepy, and the underwater sequences were a lot, but fantastic episode, and it actually showed us a lot as far as Eustace and Muriel's relationship goes. This one told us that though Eustace is a massive jerk all the time, Muriel still loves him, cares about him, and would be heartbroken if he disappeared. This episode appeared on January 21st of the year 2000, right beside none other than Everyone Wants to Direct, which has another one of my favorite title cards. It's a simple title card featuring just a clapperboard like you'd see used on a movie production, and it has a little picture of Courage on it in the corner, and something about it just sparks so much joy. As lighthearted as this title card looked, though, the episode was anything but. This is the one where famous film director Benton Tarantella shows up wanting to film a zombie flick on the Bag farmhouse. He ends up paying Eustace a bunch of money, getting him to agree, and ultimately they use the basement to film a majority of the movie. And along the way, we learn that this guy is actually a zombie here to resurrect his dead partner, who's also a zombie buried underneath the farmhouse, and they want to eat Muriel. The episode follows Courage trying to reveal the truth and stop it from happening, which definitely was a very solid storyline. It made for so many freaky moments, and the fact that we all know from the start, based on this guy's appearance, that he's a zombie, just, it's so menacing. The overall aesthetic of this episode was just so dark, and it almost gives like a grindhouse horror film type of vibe. The next episode, though, was a lot different for sure. It would be none other than The Snowman Cometh. Which, first of all, I appreciated this episode so much because its messages about climate change first and foremost. But other than that, the character of the snowman himself is just one that's so interesting to me. This one sees the Bags vacationing in the Arctic for some reason when they come across the snowman who kidnaps Eustace and Muriel, wanting to drain the liquid out of them to make an anti-melting gene, saying that only humans possess it apparently. Courage has to stop him because, of course, if he takes their anti-melting gene, then Eustace and Muriel will melt, so, come on. But yeah, this episode's a really interesting one. It was the first episode that took place outside of nowhere, and also just the snowman in general. I mean, his voice being a play on Sean Connery for some reason just lands so hilariously, especially the iconic, "The name's Man, Snowman," kind of mocking James Bond. It's just so freaking funny. But outside of the hilarity of it all, I mean, the fact that this is portrayed as the last snowman on Earth also makes for a great lesson about endangered species and wildlife preservation, interestingly enough. Now, this episode premiered on January 28th of 2000, and it premiered aside one of my least favorite episodes from season 1. That would be the precious, wonderful, adorable, lovable duckling. This one sees Eustace making some breakfast when he cracks open an egg and a little duckling pops out instead of a chicken egg. Of course, with the poor thing being freshly hatched, it sees Eustace and immediately assumes that he's its mother, and it gets a little too territorial of him trying to get rid of Muriel because she's getting a little too close to her husband for this duck's liking. Muriel, of course, all the while thinks that it's just the most adorable little cute lovable duckling ever. Courage basically has to convince Muriel that this thing is trying to unalive her because she's completely oblivious. For me, though, I just hate this episode because that stupid duck, the smile and the way it acts, it's just such a little douche and it pisses me off. The next one, though, the episode after this, is absolutely amazing. Great step in the right direction. We're talking about none other than Heads of Beef. This is the one where Muriel's all sick, so she can't make dinner, and Eustace gets all pissed off and goes off to find himself a burger to eat instead. He drags Courage along with him, and they go to this diner where it seems to Courage like the pigs are serving up people. He's trying to save Eustace as they're trying to convince him to go downstairs to be a part of their big project that his wife is cooking up. Of course, it's revealed that they just make sculptures out of beef, but regardless, Courage is still terrified, thinking that they're actually eating Eustace. It's interesting, though, because this is one of very few episodes where there's actually nothing evil or bad happening at all. It's just a complete misunderstanding and Courage being a little bit too paranoid. This one premiered on February 18th of the year 2000, right next to none other than Club Cats. Now, this would be the episode where the Bag family is on a cruise and they end up being shipwrecked, finding themselves stranded on an island that's home to a mysterious resort owned by none other than cats from the Cats Motel. The family ends up having to fight to survive their time on this island and make it off there. It's interesting because I'm pretty sure this would be the first villain from Courage that got a sequel. Lots of villains throughout the show would end up having a second appearance after their first episode, but I think Cats was the first one in this episode. But it was a good episode. One of the biggest parts I remember is Eustace being turned into like a wrecking ball crane and Muriel being turned into a washing machine and then being forced to fight one another in this coliseum. It was a pretty good episode, albeit one that admittedly I don't remember all too much in detail other than that fight scene. The next one, though, is an episode that really felt like a full circle moment. It'd be none other than The Revenge of the Chicken from Outer Space. This one was the sequel to the original pilot that I was remembering. This one sees this big, huge device in the sky using a plunger to rip heads off of things, when we learn that it's actually the giant space chicken, headless and angry, wanting to come and get heads from people. It turns out that's just a dream that Courage is having, and when he wakes up from this nightmare, he goes out to get some water to see that there's a UFO floating outside in the sky. All of a sudden, a fried chicken is slowly lowered out of it on a silver platter, this being none other than the space chicken looking for revenge after what Courage did to him in the pilot. This one would feel like such a perfect full circle moment for the series, and I think one of my favorite parts, if I recall correctly, was that scene where the giant chicken ends up showing this slideshow pretty much breaking down what happened in the pilot. It's a really clever and silly little moment that feels like such a perfect callback to the early days of the show. This episode would come out on June 9th of the year 2000, and it was paired with none other than Journey to the Center of Nowhere, which again is one of those I swear feels like an older episode in the series, but I think I was just really young when I initially saw this, so my memories are a little fuzzy. This is the episode where a drought causes Muriel's crop of eggplants to come to life, and they start plotting revenge against her, and Courage ends up dressing up as an eggplant and infiltrating them with plans of defeating them. It's funny because I do remember seeing this as a kid and being just a little confused as to why the eggplants were coming to life, but realizing now that they were just really thirsty and pissed off at her because of it makes the story a lot more hilarious in hindsight. It was an excellent episode, but the one after it, on the other hand, oh man, might just be a little bit better in my opinion. This would be none other than Little Muriel. You know, that one where this weird tornado shows up out of nowhere and for some reason turns Muriel into a toddler when she gets swept into it. Of course, with Courage having to care for toddler Muriel and go through all these different hoops to please her, such as making her macaroni and cheese, going back and forth with more cheese and less macaroni, making him fix it over and over again. But yeah, young Muriel would definitely be the biggest highlight of this episode, with it being yet another one that doesn't really have an antagonist, just Courage yet again dealing with what's happening around him. Plus, you might not have recognized it, but the voice of Little Muriel was done by none other than the voice actor behind Phil and Lil DeVille from Rugrats. I think her name is pronounced Kath Soucie. I think that's how you say it. I'm not sure, but she's a great voice actor. This episode, all in all, though, was a hilarious one, and it was paired with yet another iconic episode in The Great Fusilli, which both of these premiered on July 14th of the year 2000. The Great Fusilli is such a weird one. This one sees this talking alligator showing up out of nowhere with this like weird cart thing that he uses as a stage, wanting to turn Eustace and Muriel into puppets for part of his new show. This one sees Courage trying to stop that from happening, eventually not really being able to, as we get this like really grim ending of Courage continuing his life using Eustace and Muriel as puppets. It's one of those that, admittedly, as a kid, kind of gave me this weird sense of existential dread, just seeing Courage sitting there using those puppets to continue his life. I don't know, it was a bit much. The episode after that one, though, may have been the very first one that broke people's hearts. This would be none other than the Season 2 premiere, The Magic Tree of Nowhere. This is the one that sees Courage planting a tree from these weird seeds that show up at their house, and overnight it grows this massive tree that not only grants wishes, but also talks to them. Naturally, with Eustace being the guy that he is, his masculinity and his ability to care for his family is called into question by just the existence of this tree, and it sees Courage having to try to stop him from cutting it down, and ultimately failing, sadly. This one, though, it ends up being such a sad episode, facing topics like death and having to accept failure when you can't save someone, but at the same time, someone sacrificing themselves in order to save you. It's a lot, and it's such a good episode, and this one's a great example of just how great that this show was in general at telling deep stories like this in a really, I don't know, I don't want to say indirect way, because it comes across very direct and emotional, but it's a deep message shown in a really wholesome way, I guess you could say, which of course just feels like a big contradiction for this kind of show. In a way, this episode almost set a different kind of tone, especially considering the episode that premiered alongside it. On Halloween night, October 31st, 2000, this one premiered alongside Robot Randy, which would see a race of robot beings living on a distant planet, with one of them being bullied by the rest and being labeled as a failure. In order to prove himself, he leaves and goes to enslave a planet, heading to the Earth and enslaving the Bags on their farm, but Courage ends up realizing this robot isn't necessarily as deadly of a dictator as he portrays himself to be. He's actually a pretty soft, gentle, sensitive guy who likes whittling in his spare time. It's an amazing episode about self-acceptance and learning to go your own way, especially when you're surrounded by people who expect you to just be something that you're not. It was an excellent journey in self-acceptance, and being combined with the episode before this, The Magic Tree of Nowhere, they just made for a really positive duo of episodes. After that, though, would be none other than The Curse of Shirley, which, of course, would see the return of Shirley the Medium. This one sees her showing up at the Bag household, knocking on their door and asking if they have any spare change to help her out of poverty, and Eustace, being the jerk that he is, just yells at her and slams the door in her face. At that, she curses him with a personal little rainstorm following him all along that won't let up at all until he decides to be selfless and giving to others, which naturally doesn't come easy to Eustace, especially considering he won't even acknowledge the fact that he's cursed to begin with. By the end of it, he does learn a lesson, only to go back to his old ways and getting struck by lightning by another storm yet again, but still, it was a good episode with a lot of deep meaning behind it. One of my favorite moments, without a doubt, is the part where Shirley pulls out her saxophone and she's sitting there just belting out some sick jazz tunes between her freaking curse that she's spouting off. It's just such a sick moment, and I love it. Interestingly enough, though, this episode was paired with one that felt kind of different from the rest of the series. On December 8th, 2000, this episode premiered alongside Courage in the Big Stinkin' City. This is the episode where Muriel wins a sitar contest and she gets invited to New York City to play, and when they get there, they end up encountering this giant cockroach who offers them a place to stay, and he gives Courage all these weird missions involving this, mysterious box and having Muriel's life on the line. I don't know. Maybe I was too young, or maybe I was just a really stupid kid, but this episode kind of made zero sense to me, and I'm not sure if I've seen it anytime recently, so in my opinion, it's probably worth a rewatch on my part. Don't get me wrong, I remember this episode without a doubt, it just didn't make sense to me when I watched it back then. I don't know. The next episode, though, was one of my all-time favorite episodes of this series. It'd be none other than Family Business. This is the one where a burglar breaks into their house in the middle of the night, and we end up realizing that he's actually crazy and mistakes Courage and his family for actual family members, calling Eustace Uncle Twinkletoes and all sorts of wild, crazy stuff. There's this whole weird plot where the burglar's trying to convince them to go to Mount Rushmore and steal Lincoln's head, but he's going back and forth between lucidity and thinking that he's a burglar and thinking that he's hanging out with Nigel and Uncle Twinkletoes. I really like this one for Basil the Robber. He is just hilarious. But on top of that, it's really interesting to take in that this is one of the first ones that didn't have really anything supernatural happening. I mean, I guess the same could be said about Mother's Day, but still, there's no ghost, there's no paranormal, nothing like that. It's just this robber showing up in the middle of the night, and he's a little kooky. This episode premiered on December 29th of the year 2000 next to a really bizarre episode, none other than 1000 Years of Courage. This is the episode where there's this meteor crash that ends up sending the Bags into a far future that's ruled by sentient bananas for some reason, all guarding this really weird secret about a monkey being in charge, if I remember correctly. The mayor or whatever is actually a monkey hiding inside of a banana suit. It's kind of funny because this one feels like a nod to Planet of the Apes, but instead of, monkeys being in charge, it's bananas. This one was just overall so bizarre, and at that, it feels like it fit really well with the last episode, all things considered. After that, though, we would see the premiere of none other than Courage Meets the Mummy, which would be a really interesting one. It would see the weird professor guy informing them that the mummy of a royal Mayan baker who was subject to wrongful demise in a cookie stealing incident was reawakened and he's currently seeking revenge. It turns out Eustace and Muriel are the descendants of the people who had wronged him, and eventually he ends up coming for them. Courage ends up having to protect them from the mummy's wrath, all the while they're trying to help him essentially get some closure over what had happened. It all culminates in this hilarious scene in the end where the mummy ends up getting Eustace's special blanket as a kind of apology for what had happened. Eustace ends up really pissed off about it. It was a hilariously clever, albeit really stupid ending, if we're being honest. And this episode came alongside none other than Invisible Muriel, both of them having premiered on January 19th of 2001, making the first episodes to premiere in the year 2001. This one sees Courage digging through the yard yet again, where he finds this shiny gemstone that he gives to Muriel, only for it to turn her invisible. At that, the government ends up taking her and trying to experiment on her, with Courage needing to save her from their experimenting. It's funny because this is one of those where Courage starts to tell a really interesting story this season. Of course, us touching on conservation, environmentalism, the Tree of Nowhere, things along those lines. And now we have government conspiracy and them capturing people to experiment on. It's hilarious, and it kind of makes sense, all things considered. This feels like the kind of show that really wants to encourage its viewers to grow up to be people who look outside of the box and think about things from all angles. Up next, though, really quick, my friends, I just want to give a shout out to the fact that today's podcast is brought to you by cereal. It's a good shit. Not a sponsor, but I just went and got a bowl of cereal. And man, this shit is keeping me going right now, dude. I didn't realize how much 105 episodes was going to be. Like, man, this is a lot. Or 105 segments, I guess. Whatever, I don't fucking know. But yeah, we went to the grocery store the other day, and my daughter picked out these, their Fruit Loops, like the donut version or whatever. Their donut glazed blueberry or some shit like that. And holy fuck, these are good. 10 out of 10 recommend. I'm a little, obsessed with the blueberry flavor profile of like anything, so of course it's right up my alley. But dude, who doesn't love a good fucking bowl of cereal, man? Yeah, nothing like some cereal and Courage the Cowardly Dog. Don't mind me. As I continue to enjoy my cereal, though, the next episode that would come up in this series would be a really weird one. It was Human Habit Trail, and this one premiered on February 16th of 2001. It would see this shady salesman talking gerbil guy showing up to sell Eustace and Muriel a vacuum, and he ultimately sucks them up with the vacuum and takes them captive. Of course, Courage goes to the lair of Doc Gerbil, and he goes out of his way to save Eustace and Muriel, encountering a lot of really weird inventions and creatures along the way, such as that crazy lint lady. I'm pretty sure she lived inside of the vacuum, if I remember right. But also, one of the most memorable parts of this episode was the whole sequence with the Doc Gerbil song that's just like, "It's Doc Gerbil's world. It's Doc Gerbil's world." Dude. Just the tone of it all, too. It's so freaky. Really good episode, though. I definitely loved this one. It's another one that really plays into cool environmental themes, though, because it's more or less a gerbil, or an animal, testing cosmetic products on humans, which usually, of course, the roles would be reversed. It's low-key hilarious, because I kind of feel like if episodes like this had aired in this day and age, people would call this show woke, with all the environmentalism references and stuff like that. As if that's a bad thing, too. Like, come on, it's poking fun at the fact that humans, like, abuse animals and testing their cosmetics. Come on. On that same date of February 16th, 2001, however, we would see the premiere of an episode called Mission to the Sun, which would be just a really strange one in my opinion. Mainly because the premise sees Courage and his family, for some reason, recruited to go to the sun to prevent it from going out. And, like, along the way, there's this strange little, like, germ worm guy who's trying to prevent them from doing it. I always found this one really strange because it didn't make sense to me why Eustace and Muriel would be chosen to go to the sun and fix it. Plus, like, anybody getting that close to the sun would immediately burn up, but, you know, whatever. Sadly, though, I just learned that apparently this episode was the very last one to premiere before John R. Dilworth's brother passed away from cancer, sadly, which adds a kind of another weight of sadness to this one. It's interesting, too, because this is yet another one that plays into, you know, kind of an environmental cause, more or less, but on that same note, it's really morbid, tackling the concept of our sun burning out, which, I mean, if you've been to science class, that's kind of an inevitable probability in the very distant future. Not the kind of problem you or I likely need to worry about in our lifetime, but still, it's predicted to be a pretty catastrophic event when the time does eventually come. So, the next episode in the series would actually premiere on March 16th of 2001, and this would be none other than Courage the Fly, which is yet another really strange episode to me. This one sees Dai Lung, of all people, for some reason testing scientific experiments at Eustace and Muriel's house, which, I mean, I don't know, it's just strange because Dai Lung was always portrayed as kind of a, I don't know, I don't want to call him stupid, but he was always more focused on, like, driving nice cars and doing stupid shit like that rather than, like, science. But, yeah, this is the episode where Dai Lung turns Courage into a housefly, and he has to go through the whole process of being turned back into a normal dog and not being, you know, swatted along the way. And this episode would appear alongside none other than Cat's Candy. And I think I already said this one came out on March 16th, 2001, but in case I didn't already say that, yeah, they came out on March 16th, 2001. Oh man, that blueberry milk in the cereal hits so hard too. I forgot to ask, what's your favorite cereal, dude? Let me know in the comments down below. Everybody has a favorite cereal or two. For me, it's Captain Crunch or Frosted Flakes. By far, those two are my favorites. And not like the normal Captain Crunch, it's got to be Crunch Berries. That one is just so good. But yeah, let me know in the comments, friends, what is your favorite cereal? Okay, now that my bowl of cereal's done, though, back on track, fully focused on Courage, no cereal sidelines anymore. This episode featured cats losing the sweet stuff contest in nowhere. Dude, I'm just now realizing I don't think I remember this episode at all. Apparently, in his anger around losing the contest, Katz uses his jam monster to kidnap Courage and Muriel to figure out her secrets behind her award-winning sweets? I don't know, I'm reading this description here, and apparently this one would see Katz, in the end, trying to turn Eustace and Muriel into Taffy, but getting turned into Taffy himself. And in the end, it turns out that Muriel's secret ingredient was, of course, vinegar, as it always is. Yeah, I don't know, for some reason I don't remember this episode, and I wonder if maybe it's because it's a little too close to Cajun Granny Stew and the fact that Katz looks a little bit like the fox from that episode. I don't know. The episode after that, though, would be none other than Nowhere TV. This one sees LeQuack posing as a TV repairman as he manipulates the bag's TV so that it hypnotizes Eustace and Muriel into stealing money from the Nowhere lottery for him. This is an episode that to me was never all too memorable for the events of it and them trying to rob the Nowhere lottery. What I really remembered this one before was how odd that Eustace and Muriel were when they were hypnotized by LeQuack. I remember Eustace just spouting off, must be slippery, must be slick, must be smooth. Meanwhile, Muriel was going around just letting out like a howdy howdy hooty or some weird shit like that. Dude, I don't know, this episode was kind of a mindfuck if we're being honest. In a good way though, I liked it, don't get me wrong, it was just really trippy. This one came out on April 13th of 2001 alongside Mega Muriel the Magnificent. Oddly enough, this episode would actually see Courage's usually helpful computer becoming the bad guy, as it takes over Muriel's body, claiming that all living creatures are timid and cowardly. Basically, this computer, now donning Muriel's body, ends up trying to do all sorts of death-defying stunts to prove that humans are weak, and by the end, Courage ends up having to save Muriel from the computer as it's nearly destroying her with all the crazy things that it's doing. Now, I like this episode, but it's one that I haven't seen in such a really long time that I feel like I struggled to remember it a little bit. Like, I feel like I have this hazy memory of computer Muriel being dressed up as Evil Knievel and about to go down like a big motorcycle ramp or something like that. But also, like, it's been so long since I've seen this one, part of me wonders if I'm just, like, making that up and if this is just some distant fever dream that I had after watching the show or something like that. I don't know, but regardless, the episode after that would be none other than Bad Hair Day, which would see Ma Bag making her return and her company Growth Industries trying to test its hair growth serum. They're looking for someone with a very specific blood type, which just so happens to be Muriel, and she has her henchmen capture her to try to test on her. Of course, Courage saves her by the end of the day, and all in all, I don't know, this episode, I don't want to say that I didn't like it, it was still a good one, but as I said before, Muriel, Eustace's mom just pisses me off. She's just such a jerk. With that being said, though, I do want to give a shout out to the late great Billy Lou Watt, who did the voice of her character. This would sadly be the very final episode released in her lifetime, as all episodes featuring her after this would be released posthumously. But yeah, this one was a good episode. This one was a good episode, and I really liked it because it was one where Courage and Eustace actually got along and had to work together for once. We would see this one come out on May 18th of 2001 alongside the famous Forbidden Hat of Gold, which is another one of my favorite episodes. In this one, we see Eustace finding his brother Horst's map leading to a hat made of solid gold. As he follows the map, dragging Muriel and Courage with him, of course, they end up stumbling upon a society of ancient monks, and they awaken a very angry golem to try to sacrifice the family to. The ending of this one is definitely one of my all-time favorites of any episode of this show, showing it has the ancient golem putting on this jacket that Courage got it. It's like a big fluffy fur coat. And after Courage gives one of the coats to the rest of the monks and they put them on as well, the golem ends up exploding, which, like, defeats all of them more or less. I don't know, it was a really funny and random ending, especially the whole fashion fur coat aspect. The episode that followed this one, though, was really crazy. It was one of the first, like, really artsy episodes of this show, and to me, there's, like, two big ones that come to mind when I think of that. Maybe three, actually, but this is, like, the first big one to come to mind. Of course, that's none other than Serpent of Evil River. This one sees Eustace, Muriel, and Courage watching TV when they get lured in by a commercial for Captain Sharky and his fishing trip that he's taking people on, saying that the trip is going to be free for the first 3 passengers. Of course, Eustace, wanting a fishing trip, signs his family up for it, only to find out that the creature they're hunting is a giant one-eyed sea serpent. Ultimately, though, this serpent isn't evil or monstrous at all. It's actually a beautiful singer, and it just wanted an audience to hear it sing. The creature, named Carmen, ends up singing the habanera from Carmen, and it's just such a beautiful and amazing moment. As someone who's stumbled upon a recent newfound love for opera music, I really love this episode. This one would come to the light of day on June 1st of 2001, alongside an episode called The Transplant. This is the one where Eustace gets a bone transplant, and this prehistoric bone ends up turning him into a giant kangaroo monster. And in order to stop him, Courage ends up getting the same exact procedure, turning himself into a kangaroo monster as well. This one overall was really just kind of a bizarre episode, but one of the biggest parts that stuck to my mind was Eustace carrying Muriel around in his kangaroo pouch as if she were a Joey, when, like, only female kangaroos have pouches. I don't know. It was just such a strange moment. But all in all, this one was a really good episode, and I really did like the whole kaiju theme that they went with. It was definitely kind of a new, fresh take for this show that usually plays into a lot of classic horror kind of tropes. The one after that, though, would actually appear on October 26, 2001. And this would be none other than Car Broke. Phone. Yes? In this episode, we see the space alien appear from outer space and land in nowhere when it comes across Muriel and steals her kindness, which makes her, really mean to her husband and everybody else. This episode would follow Courage as he goes into the spaceship to get Muriel's kindness back from the alien, and that, I don't know, it's just a really odd one all in all, especially the design of the alien and, the way it talks. Plus, Muriel being evil just felt wrong. Like, her calling Courage a stupid dog in this episode it felt way too out of character for her. This episode appeared alongside Cowboy Courage, though, which would be an episode where we see Muriel reading Courage a Western-themed bedtime story, only for him to end up dreaming that he's a Wild West sheriff taking on an undead outlaw named the Whip. Of course, in his dream, the Whip is played by none other than Eustace, since, that's the main antagonist in Courage's life. Honestly, I'm not normally the hugest fan of, Western-themed things. However, this and Red Dead Redemption would be one of my biggest exceptions to that. This was a pretty good episode. Eustace as the Whip was incredibly menacing, and for me, one of the most memorable moments from this one was how much he'd struck fear into the townspeople, having to the point of them just calling him the wah, because they can't even get out the whip. It's so funny. The next episode, though, would be another really creepy one. It's none other than Evil Weevil. In this episode, Eustace accidentally runs over a giant weevil with his truck while he's driving, and Muriel, being the kind heart that she is, invites the creature into their home to heal. Unfortunately, though, this weevil just ends up feeding on Eustace and Muriel, and God, it's just so creepy. There's this whole scene where the weevil's giving Muriel a shoulder massage and drinking from her, turning her bone thin. This is another episode that I feel like I don't really remember all too much, and I'm not surprised given the whole bug drinking from you thing. I feel like this would have really creeped me out as a kid, and I'm not surprised I don't really remember that one. And oddly enough, I actually remember the episode that it was packaged with. That'd be none other than McPherson Phantom. This one came out on November 2nd, 2001, and it would see a vengeful spirit showing up to the house trying to drive a wedge between Muriel and Eustace for an old grudge that it's carrying. And it essentially turns Eustace and Muriel against each other, causing them to prank each other and hurt each other. Ma Bag shows up wanting to play the role of therapist, more or less wanting to drive Muriel out of the house, surprise, surprise. And lo and behold, it would turn out that it was actually Ma Bag's ancestor who had committed the crime against the Phantom. The episode to premiere after that one, though, would be none other than The House of Discontent. Now, this one sees Eustace butting heads with both Muriel and a harvest spirit who's mocking his pitiful attempts at farming and gardening on this atrociously dry land. It follows Courage trying to prove to the spirit once and for all that Eustace really does have the ability to grow anything before midnight. Or else. But yeah, this is one of those episodes, again, I don't remember all too much, other than, of course, the spirit of the harvest moon, which is that iconic, gigantic, live-action head in the sky. It was definitely a really creepy and iconic moment from the show, but I feel like there was actually many episodes that focused on Eustace not being able to garden, so I feel like I kind of get confused for that reason. But then again, we'll see. Maybe there weren't that many episodes, and I was just a young kid mixing up my memories. That episode would premiere on November 9th of 2001 alongside an episode called The Sand Whale Strikes, which would actually be right about our halfway point for our jaunt through all of these episodes here. This would be segment number 50, pretty much smack dab right in the middle of all the episodes made. But this one sees Eustace, oddly enough, being hunted by this angry whale that's chasing after him for revenge on his father over an accordion of all things. It's just overall a really strange premise, and by the end, Courage ends up needing to get the help of Ma Bag in order to figure out how to pacify the whale and save her son. The next episode, though, would be the second one that I really consider to be such a very artsy kind of episode. That's none other than the Tower of Dr. Zalost. So this one premiered on January 11th of 2002, and it tackled some pretty deep topics. It would see an extremely depressed and misunderstood professor who's struggling to deal with his emotions, trying to overcome his jealousy of other people and their happiness by trying to make them just as miserable as he is. Of course, Courage ends up being heavily affected by Muriel having her happiness sucked away at the hands of this doctor, and he ends up having to get everybody's happiness back and defeat the doctor and hopefully make him happy too. It's a really deep episode, and it's hard to really touch on all the topics here in such a short amount of time, but I did make a really deep episode, or video, whatever. I made a really deep video about this one once upon a time, and I'm really proud of how it turned out. For me personally, at the time, I was going through a lot. My dad had recently passed away, and I was a little depressed myself, so tackling an episode like this and kind of sinking some of my feelings into it was very therapeutic in a sense. This episode, though, was a huge one, and it would end up being the Season 2 finale. After that, we would get Season 3, Episode 1, all the way on November 16th of 2001, in the form of none other than Muriel meets her match. This one would see notorious robbers Maria and Mano Ladrones framing Muriel for their crimes, as, oddly enough, this Maria lady looks a lot like Muriel. As they're on the run from the police, they end up showing up and claiming to be their new neighbors, even though there's not a house anywhere in sight out here. They get close enough for this lady to try to steal Muriel's identity, and by the end, Courage ends up having to defeat them. It's interesting that this one touches on the theme of Muriel meeting her match and somebody that's a lot like her, just evil and more cunning, because the next episode that would come along with it would be none other than Courage versus Mecha Courage. Which, I guess this proves my previous statements wrong. This one sees Dai Lung making a Mecha Courage robot, trying to make a better dog than Courage. Essentially, Courage ends up in a competition to prove that he is the better dog of the two, and it's kind of hilarious because it feels like Godzilla versus Mecha Godzilla in a way. According to the wiki, though, too, apparently this episode has a line where Dai Lung says, "Courage, you no good-ass dog?" And I feel like that didn't happen. I have to go back and rewatch this because part of me is like confident there's no way they said that on Cartoon Network. Then again, though, I have a track record of eating my words, so who knows? The episode after this, though, was none other than the Campsite of Terror. This one sees Eustace, Muriel, and Courage going out camping when they get attacked by two rowdy raccoon cubs who take Muriel captive. Courage ends up having to rescue Muriel from them, but he finds out along the way that these cubs aren't evil at all, they just want a mother. And in the end, they end up having Eustace as their mother and letting Courage and Muriel go home. This one premiered on February 8th of 2002 alongside an episode called Record Deal, which I remember, but I completely forgot about until reading about it. This is that one where Eustace finds that record possessed by his favorite musician, Velvet Vic, and when he plays it, Velvet Vic comes out of the record, and if I remember right, I'm pretty sure he ends up trapping Muriel inside of the record instead, and Courage has to get her out of it. If anything, I'm learning that I'm due for a rewatch of Courage here, because there's so many later episodes in the series that I feel like I don't remember all too well until I have my memory jogged. Like, I watched Season 1 so much, and a bit of Season 2, of course, but it feels like Season 3 and 4 I didn't give as much attention, even though I really did like them. But, I don't know, then again, maybe it's about which episodes stuck with me, because the one after this I remember without a doubt. So after that episode, we got an episode called Stormy Weather, which, in my opinion, this episode kind of epitomizes the later seasons of Courage the Cowardly Dog. And not in a bad way, too. It's not, like, I almost don't know what I mean by that, but there's just something about this episode that feels so different from everything else before it. It felt like a different direction going forward as far as like the production of the show goes. And again, I don't know what I mean by that because this is just a normal episode of Courage, really. So, my opinions really are just personal as far as that goes. Take that for what you will, but this is that episode where this, like, storm goddess comes down from the skies above and she ends up developing a strong love for Courage, thinking that he is her lost dog, Duncan. Along the way, Muriel and her end up, like, pretty much fighting for who owns Courage, and it culminates in this big, massive tornado, if I recall correctly. All the while, Courage has to solve the situation by finding Duncan and bringing him back, of course. It was a pretty good episode, though. I mean, though it felt a lot different from the rest of the series to me. I still liked it, and it definitely is one of those where the Storm Goddess in particular was probably the biggest aspect that made me feel different about this one. It felt almost like Once Upon a Time in Courage the Cowardly Dog. There was a point where all the characters showing up were original, and sometimes there was random background characters, but later on in the series, you would see a lot of, like, antagonists we've seen in the past, or people who had pretty decent roles showing up as background characters. Like, I'm 99% sure this Storm Goddess, we would end up seeing that same character model in the background of other episodes in the future. And I know we've seen, like, the butchers from the episode Heads of Beef, and the businessman from the beginning of that episode who had his head sculpted out of beef as well. We've seen that guy as background characters, him and the butchers. Plus, too, like, the little angry bald guy from Hothead whose head explodes when he gets angry in the bathroom. Yeah, we've seen a lot of these characters who kind of had at least semi-prominent roles at one point show up in background positions later on in the series, and for me, I think that's one of the biggest deciding factors here of what kind of separates old Courage from new Courage. Yeah, I don't know, it might not make much sense as I'm talking off the cuff, but it feels so different, and this is one of those that really had me noticing it, even though there wasn't any background characters here that kind of fit that role. The Storm Goddess in particular, like, she really played such a big prominent role here, and the only thing I can think about is how later on she showed up again just kind of in the background. I don't know, it's weird. But this episode came out on March 15th of 2002 alongside none other than The Sandman Sleeps. Which, this episode's crazy because it almost feels like it's trying to be a fever dream in a sense. It's the one where the Sandman is having trouble sleeping, so he shows up and takes Muriel's ability to sleep in order for him to get some decent rest. Of course, Courage has to get Muriel's ability to sleep back, and of course he has to help the king figure out, like, what his whole deal is that's stopping him from sleeping. It's interesting to say this one feels like a fever dream because it's one that, like, I remember, don't get me wrong, and the events of it made sense, but there's just something about an episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog of all shows being about the Sandman and sleeping that just feels like a fever dream for sure. That was a great one though, and after that we would get an episode called Hard Drive Courage, which would premiere on June 7th, 2002. This one sees Courage having to enter his computer when it gets infected with a virus and accidentally sucks Muriel into cyberspace. This episode was a really interesting one because this would be the first time that they, like, really heavily used CGI animation for a good portion of the episode, which, in my opinion at least, does fit Courage pretty well. I feel like the show works with that 3D CGI style animation. But regardless of that, this one is kind of funny when you think about it, having come out in the year 2002. It feels like it was just in that prime spot where every cartoon had to have that obligatory futuristic computer or TV themed episode, kind of like how Fairly Odd Parents did with, like, Channel Chasers and a few other episodes. In a way, it feels like you could not have been a cartoon in the early 2000s and resisted having to do that inevitable futuristic tech-centered episode, and this was that one for Courage. This episode would be packaged alongside none other than Ride of the Valkyries. This is another one of those episodes that does feel artsy, but to be honest, I completely forgot about this one. This one's named after the famous opera, of course, so it's no surprise that there's a lot of really deep artistic expression in this one. But apparently it's about them being on a Scandinavian vacation and Muriel getting caught up in a feud between a band of Valkyries and a troupe of trolls. I guess Muriel gets mistaken for one of the Valkyries and gets sent off to battle, and Courage has to rescue her before she's sent into war. So more or less this one surrounds Courage being caught in the middle of a war between two factions, trying to find some peace between the two of them. I don't know, I had a hard time getting into opera when I was a little kid, so that's probably why I don't remember this one all too much, but still, being really into it now, I really need to rewatch this episode. Apparently, the guy who worked on the music for this show labeled this episode and the Doc Zalos episode as the best ones as far as music is concerned, and the ones that he's the most proud of, so, again, I'm really stoked to look at this one again, and maybe make a video about it. Who knows? A week after that episode aired, though, on June 14th of 2002, we'd see the premiere of an episode called Scuba Doo. There we go. The name, of course, being a play on Scooby-Doo. This one sees Courage and Muriel discovering an underwater civilization of tiny coral-dwelling people, when, of course, Ma Bag comes along and tries to annihilate them, wanting to use their type of coral to make the best wigs. Of course, Courage plays the role of the defender of this little underwater civilization, wanting to protect them from Eustace's mother's greedy wrath. And look at us, here we are again with another episode that has some more environmentalist themes in it. I love to see it. But yeah, I definitely remember this one. I remember enjoying this episode. But I am sad to say that this would actually be the very last episode that featured Ma Bag, as it was the final one that they had been able to record with her voice actress before she sadly passed away. That episode got paired with an episode called Conway the Contaminationist. Now, I don't ever want to make this podcast political, but holy shit, I feel like this episode definitely is relevant in this day and age. This one sees an unkempt elderly pilot named Conway crashing his plane near the farmhouse while promoting his motto of live longer, live better. Of course, Muriel and Courage bring him inside to heal, and along the way he claims that his good health is a result of his unconventional and very dirty lifestyle, encouraging the family to live in filth and squalor to make him comfortable, and claiming that it'll make them live longer as a result. This guy says that living his very dirty and against the grain lifestyle is what has him living to the ripe old age of 193. Yeah, as far as the literal side of this aspect goes, there's theories going around that apparently this guy could be an alien from a different planet where filthiness is healthy to them and he's disguising himself as a human. But there's no evidence for that at all whatsoever. It's just kind of what the community has put together as an excuse for this guy actually maybe making it to 193 years old. Other than that, though, this episode is one that I love specifically for that scene where we see Courage running away from the plane as it's coming toward him. It's a very, very perfect reference to North by Northwest that so many different shows and cartoons have made references to over the years, and Courage captured it just flawlessly. It's really cool seeing a show that's known for spoofing old horror movies make references to some cult classics as well. So, after this one, we had an episode called Cats Under the Sea, which, in hindsight, it feels like it's predicting the future a little bit. So, in this one, you guys, Muriel gets pretty fed up with Eustace's angry, constant, demanding nature, so she decides to take Courage on a submarine vacation. Little do they know, it's apparently being organized and put together by none other than cats. I mean, just that alone. Is anybody else thinking about Ocean Gate and, cats as Stockton Rush a little bit? Oh, just me? Yeah, I figured. But yeah, unlike Stockton Rush, Cats' intention is to drown everybody there except for himself. It's kind of crazy though, because man, not only did the show, give us warnings about environmentalism, climate change, the dangers of deforestation, the dangers of being selfish, but also apparently the dangers of billionaires trying to take you on submarine vacations. Silliness aside though, this episode came out on June 21st of 2002 alongside an episode called Curtain of Cruelty. So in this episode, one day this ominous wave of pink light shows up out of nowhere and engulfs the entire area, turning everybody all angry and mean except for Courage and Muriel. Of course, with all of society now being mean and bitter and angry, Muriel gets taken away to conversion camp for being nice to turn her into a mean person just like everybody else. Of course, in this one, we see Courage trying to get to the bottom of where this curtain came from and trying to turn everybody kind again. Surprise plot twist, it turns out that it was actually Floyd, the little old man from the episode Hothead, who was behind the whole thing, and he ends up redeeming himself by the end of the episode. It's interesting, though, because this one bears such an incredible familiarity to the Tower of Dr. Zalost. I mean, an angry guy, or I guess in the doctor's case, depressed guy, going around and using this mega weapon to attack everybody in town and make them all inflicted with the same issue that he has. I mean, yeah, it's pretty much the same exact story, just with a different person. With that being said, I'll be honest and say I don't really remember this episode all too much either, and that's not all too surprising given that it kind of blends with another episode. After it, though, was an episode that I definitely remember, being none other than Feast of the Bullfrogs, which came out on June 28th of 2002. And this would be the one where that group of bullfrogs lose their home, and they end up coming over to Eustace and Muriel's farmhouse, deciding to take it over and make it their new house. They tear up the floor and build a pond in the ground and everything. It's one of those where I remember this episode, and I did like it, but the bullfrogs being all, like, demanding and turning Eustace and Muriel into bullfrogs themselves, it was just really creepy. It made me weary of frogs, if I'm going to be honest, and seeing this as a little kid in 2002 kind of had a bit of an effect on me, even though it was such a lighthearted and random episode. I'm cool with frogs nowadays, though. I mean, we good, but still, it was weird. This one was packaged, though, along with an episode called Tulip's Worm. Now, I honestly can't help but wonder if, as a kid, I turned the TV off after Feast of the Bullfrogs, because I do not remember this episode whatsoever. Apparently, it revolves around two teddy bears with laser guns appearing in a spaceship searching for some space worm that ended up on Earth. Apparently, this worm swallows the bears and Muriel, so Courage has to, like, save them all and defeat it and everything. Yeah, I don't know, dude. Like, seeing a picture of the teddy bears from this episode, I remember seeing those bears at some point, but I do not remember this episode. I mean, there's a good chance that I saw it maybe once and never watched it again, but who knows. Sadly, though, this would apparently be the very final episode where Lionel Wilson would be the voice of Eustace. After this one, it would be none other than Arthur Anderson stepping into the role. And the first episode to feature him would be one called So In Love Are We Two. This episode was quite a trip, and I definitely remember it. It's the one where they're all going to this art museum in Europe, and Muriel ends up looking at the Mona Lisa and talking about how her mother always said that Muriel resembled Mona Lisa a bit. Eventually, Muriel falls asleep in the museum, and when she wakes up, she ends up talking to the painting of the Mona Lisa as it comes to life, and the stars align as she switches place with her, and Muriel ends up being put inside of the painting. Meanwhile, Eustace switches place with the Thinker statue. And, of course, Courage has to chase down the Thinker and Mona Lisa to get them to take their places again and let Eustace and Muriel be free. In my opinion, this one was a great episode, and it feels like a kind of early precursor to Night at the Museum, just a little bit. Which, actually, now that I think about it, that might have been a remake, the fucking Ben Stiller one or whatever, so maybe it's just a play on an old movie. I don't know. But still, it was a really cool episode, and I really appreciated it. This one would see the light of day on July the 5th of 19... Jesus, where am I? July the 5th of 2002, alongside an episode called Night of the Scarecrow, which this one was actually really cool. I like this pair of episodes. It's the one where the Scarecrow shows up and it vows to become Muriel's bodyguard after she saves his life, but he's not really all that scary, so he decides to like make himself all bigger and stronger and muscular and stuff. And along the way that goes to his head, and Courage ends up having to put him straight. It was definitely a good episode about perception, how you perceive yourself, and how others perceive you, and for me particularly, I really liked the animation and the art style behind the Scarecrow, especially when he ended up looking all like badass and muscular. They drew him really cool. After that, we had an episode called Mondo Magic. Now, this episode was actually pretty bizarre in my opinion. This one sees Muriel becoming the target of this mysterious magician who has a big old secret, and he shows up at the farmhouse turning her into this freaky, weird creature using his magic dust. More or less, the plot follows Courage having to turn her back to normal before a specific time, and her being stuck as a monster's bride forever. Again, I remember this one, but it's really faint, so I'm pretty sure I only saw it once, maybe twice if I was lucky. This one came out on July 12th of 2002, and it was packaged along with one called Watch the Birdies. Now, I do remember this one. I know I saw this one at least a couple times. This is the one where Muriel gets kidnapped by this big old vulture who's actually a mother and just wants Muriel to watch her kids while she's away. Muriel and Courage end up taking care of the babies from their nest, all the while being threatened by this snake that Courage has to fend off to keep the babies safe until their mother gets back. In this episode, one of the biggest things that stuck with me was the drawing of the birds and their art style in general. They were just really funny looking. Plus, there's this whole gag with Courage trying to feed them escargot and Muriel being like, oh no, they need worms. But like, baby birds, I'm pretty sure do eat like snails and slugs and worms and really like any bug that their mom will chew up and spit in their mouth. But yeah, that was an interesting one, and it was preceded by none other than Fishy Business. This one is another just really bizarre and weird episode. It sees these fish missionaries showing up and taking the Bag family to a more civilized place for them to live, dragging them underwater. Courage has to go to the underwater world to save Eustace and Muriel, all the while, like, they are turning into fish, more or less, and it's just so strange. This one's just such a bizarre episode, and I remember seeing it and being just really confused by this one, especially because by the end it ends up being like these fish judges that show up being upset with the fish missionaries and getting them in trouble and setting Eustace and Muriel free. I don't know. It's just strange that fish are the problem, fish are the solution, and Eustace and Muriel are just kind of there for the ride, I guess. This episode saw the light of day on July 19th of 2002 alongside an episode called Angry Nasty People. This one would see the return of the director Benton Tarantella as he shows up at the farmhouse looking to offer stardom to Eustace and Muriel yet again, this time in the form of a reality TV show that showcases just how much of a jerk that Eustace is. This is another one of those episodes that I remember specifically for the return of Benton Tarantella, but I actually don't remember like any other details of this one, so in my opinion it's worth a rewatch for sure. After this one, we were treated to an episode called Dome of Doom, which would see Eustace signing up the family to be part of an experimental biodome, but it turns out that this is actually a biodome infested with man-eating plants. Of course, throughout this whole one, it's Eustace and his family trying to survive the plants and make it out of this biodome. This episode came out on July 26th, 2002, and it's interesting because I know for sure that this is another episode I maybe only saw once because I don't remember the man-eating plants aspect. I swear I remember them being put into this biodome to be like watched and experimented on, but I don't remember there being dangerous plants in there. What I do remember clear as day, though, is the episode that came packaged with this one. None other than Snowman's Revenge, the both having premiered on July 26, 2002. This is the one where the snowman shows up yet again, this time really angry because the ice caps are melting and his Arctic tundra that he calls home is turning into a wet and watery water world. At that, he decides to call the Bag farmhouse his new home, using a free ray to basically turn it into the new North Pole. Again, yet another episode that would tackle climate change, and this one would actually see Courage needing to close a giant hole in the ozone layer himself. I always loved this episode because I appreciate the snowman as a character himself, and the message that comes along this one is just such an important one for all of us to see as people, too. After that, though, we got an episode called The Quilt Club, which came out on August 2nd of 2002. This is the one where Muriel, who's recently been really into quilting, becomes obsessed with proving herself to be one of the best quilters out there, which plays right into the hands of a pair of sinister quilting twins. Basically, it turns out that these twin sisters have been more or less luring people into their quilting club and have been surviving for hundreds of thousands of years by essentially having people sew a specific symbol onto the fabric. And that somehow basically captures their life essence and gives the rest of their lifetime to these sisters. I don't know. It's weird and it feels kind of like it's nodding to a cult, just a little bit. This one came packaged along with an episode called Swindlin' Mind, which would see Eustace cheating Shirley at a swap meet and basically stealing from her, so she puts a curse on him and Muriel that pretty much makes them want to cheat and swindle each other back and forth. Of course, it makes their entire life miserable, and Courage, caught in the middle of it all, has to go out of the way to reverse the curse by any means possible. This one was yet another awesome Shirley episode, and it's one that I appreciate because, like most of her episode, most of the episodes involving her, it comes along with a really important lesson about valuing everybody, not just those who have something to offer you. Eustace is one of those people who only treats Shirley with respect in the moments where he feels like he can get something from her. And even then, most of the time he's a disrespectful asshole to her. And every single time without fail, he ends up having to learn the lesson the hard way. The episode that came after this one, though, is one that was just burned into so many brains. This would be none other than King of Flan. In this one, Courage ends up being confused when every single person in Nowhere ends up obsessed with this new brand Flantasy Flan, wanting to eat their flan nonstop and becoming addicted. It turns out that the King of Flan is just trying to hypnotize people, and yeah, it's just really creepy. Everybody just walking around like zombies talking about flan is just, I don't know. It burned itself into a lot of kids' brains back then, and this one, maybe it was the smile of the King of Flan too, and just his creepy face. I don't know, but it gave the weirdest vibes. This episode, though, got packaged along with an episode called Courage Under the Volcano, and the two came out on August 9th, 2002, and they'd serve as the finale for Season 3 of the show. This would be the episode where they're on vacation, and this tribe ends up finding them, and they bring Muriel to this volcano, wanting to sacrifice her to the volcano god, and of course, Courage has to save her and stop them from doing that. It turns out, though, that the volcano god isn't actually real. It's just some guy in an office inside of the volcano that he ended up mechanically changing so he can control it and basically make the volcano scare all the natives off of the island so he can sell condos there. By the end of it all, he ends up being defeated, and it's revealed that there actually is a god of the volcano, and it's pretty pissed off at this guy for doing what he's doing. But yeah, this is interesting to think about as an episode because it really does tackle a lot of big concepts in one fell swoop. I mean, overall, turning a uninhabited area into a urban house with all the cookie cutter houses looking exactly the same, using fear to force people off of their native land, and of course the dangerous monopolization of the real estate industry. It was a really good episode that was chock full of a lot of different important life lessons, and on top of that, just the quality of it as a cartoon was through the roof. This is one of the episodes that proved that even all the way in Season 3 up to Season 4, Courage really did stand strong as an excellent Cartoon Network original show. Interestingly enough, though, less than a month later, we would see the premiere of Season 4 on September 6th of 2002 in the episode called A Beaver's Tale. This one sees a beaver showing up and building a dam in Nowhere, which causes some massive flooding. Of course, it's up to Courage to save the day, and he makes his way to the dam to learn that the beaver building this dam has a lot more to his story, struggling with acceptance from his father and always wanting to be a musician, so of course, Courage saves the day by making some music with this guy. It was another awesome episode that definitely touched on aspects of self-acceptance and moving on from a troubled past, generational trauma and parental issues, things along those lines. It made for a really good and compelling opener for this entire season, and it was packaged with another really good one in an episode called The Nutcracker. This is one that I made a video about, I think maybe like a year ago roughly, maybe a little less or more than that, but it sees the Bag family going to the dump to do some dumpster diving and see if they can find anything cool, only to get locked inside the dump over the night. At one point, Courage finds a nutcracker toy, and they end up getting attacked by some rats, and the story more or less follows that of the Nutcracker Ballet. It encapsulates messages of one man's trash being another man's treasure and being able to find some value in places where others can't. This one, though, this was kind of the other episode I was thinking about when I brought up artsy episodes. Between the drawn animation, choreography, the music, everything here, this one really is just such an interestingly approached artsy episode, especially considering it takes place in a dump of all places. But regardless of that, they were able to capture the Nutcracker Ballet and its essence pretty well. After that episode, we got one called Rumpled Kilt Skin, which would be a play on Rumpelstiltskin. In this one, we see Muriel receiving a telegram for her Uncle Angus in Scotland saying that she's the last person who can weave her family quilt because the quilt weaver they had passed away. Muriel and Courage travel to Scotland to meet her Uncle Angus, but it turns out that Uncle Angus is actually a really bad person and isn't her uncle at all. At least, I think. Don't hold me to that. He might actually be her uncle, but I could have swore this guy wasn't really her uncle. He's actually an evil, greedy, and cruel kilt maker who wants to enslave her to make her produce kilts for outlet malls so he can get rich. Of course, this one just sees Courage trying to break Muriel free and save her from Rumpelstiltskin, and ultimately it's just another really odd and bizarre episode, this time playing into a classic kids story. They ended up pairing this episode with one called House Calls, and they aired on September 13th of 2002. This one follows a guy by the name of Dr. Gerhardt who's really lonely and wants some neighbors, but his sentient house is angry and old and envious of all other houses, so it scares everybody away. He invents something to bring the Bag's house next to his, but his house, of course, intends on destroying theirs and basically dominating and being the house to rule all houses, I guess. This episode would be followed up by one called Le Quack Balloon. Of course, this one would see the return of Le Quack as he takes Muriel on this trip to Sweden, saying that he's going to get her some rare Swedish vinegar for her cookies, but really, he's just using her to steal money from Sweden. Of course, Courage has to save her, and along the way, Le Quack ends up making off with nothing but burned Swedish money. All the meanwhile, Muriel ends up actually getting some pretty nice vinegar, so it all works out pretty well. This was an episode that aired on September 20th of 2002, and it would be packaged with none other than windmill vandals, which this one was actually pretty creepy. This one sees the Bag's windmill stop turning, and when it does, 4 undead vandals show up and start attacking everybody, and they end up having to fix the windmill to get it running because for some reason that windmill spinning keeps these creatures away. This one was pretty creepy for a few different reasons, one of the biggest of course being the vandals attacking the homestead because of what's happening with that windmill. But it does have a really interesting aspect that not a lot of other episodes had. The fact that in this episode, for once, we see Eustace and Muriel both fully aware of the threat at hand and actually working with Courage to fix it and stop the problem. This one was a fantastic episode. The one after it, though, I feel like I kind of remember, but I'm also not sure if I remember it because it feels like it doesn't sound very familiar. This would be none other than the Uncommon Cold. This one sees Muriel being incredibly sick, and when she sneezes, this slug inside of a bubble gives a message to Courage saying that he and a bunch of other slugs are slaves in the bayou and that freeing them will cure Muriel's sickness. Courage and Muriel end up making their way to the slugs and rescuing them to save them and save Muriel as well. But I don't know, I feel like I don't remember this one because there's just so many episodes where Muriel ends up incredibly sick and they start blending together. Especially when we start getting to these later episodes in the series that I didn't watch all too often as the early episodes. It's weird though, because this episode aired on September 27th of 2002, and clear as day I can remember the episode that came along with it. None other than Farmer Hunter, Farmer Hunted. Granted, I will say I remember this one a lot because I recently made a video about it, but even before making that video, I remembered seeing this episode. So, with that being said, The Uncommon Cold is one of those where, again, I'm confident I saw it, but it probably just blended in with way too many similar episodes. But yeah, Farmer Hunter, Farmer Hunted is the one where Eustace ends up feeling self-conscious because of his brother Horst and his reputation for being such a great hunter, and at that, Eustace decides to prove himself as a great hunter, dragging Courage out into the woods to go claim a buck, only to end up himself being claimed by the bucks in the end. I appreciated this one a lot because it definitely gave us a lot more of a look into the why behind Eustace and his relationship with his brother. Up to this point, it was just kind of shown that Eustace was a jerk and was jealous, but seeing Horst and the way he treated Eustace kind of makes everything make a little more sense. That episode was followed up by none other than Bride of the Swamp Monster, which is another episode I definitely remember. This is the one where the Bags end up having an accident and crashing their car in a swamp, and they end up coming upon a lovesick swamp monster who mistakes Muriel for his long-lost love and tries to take her to be his bride. It's up to Courage to save Muriel from the swamp monster and becoming the bride to this thing. And to me, personally, the biggest thing I remember is the swamp monster and him saying, "Swamp woman." Just like the way he said it, the tone and all of that, it was burned into my brain from the first moment that I saw this episode. It was a pretty good one though. It premiered on October 4th of 2002 alongside an episode known as Goat Paint. This is yet another episode that would lean really heavily into the conservation aspects, as it would see Muriel waking up with a really bad backache and being told by Dr. Vindaloo that she needs to travel to a hot spring on top of Mount Nowhere, which is known for its healing properties. When they get there, the only thing standing in their way is this huge, massive, angry mountain goat who guards the hot springs, furious at mankind for drying it out and for clogging the hot springs with garbage. This one sees them, of course, trying to get past the goat, all the while wanting to figure out how to clean out the hot spring and maybe undo some of the damage that mankind has done. This is another one of those episodes that I really just appreciate so much, especially for the message behind it, and I do appreciate the role that the goat played, being the defender of this hot spring, wanting to stop any more damage from being done. He was a jerk, but he was a rightful jerk. He had a good reason. This one would be followed up by an episode called Muriel Blows Up. This episode is just bizarre, and it sees an experimental carrot turning Muriel into a giant, and as she grows and expands further and further, she risks exploding. Now, this one's kind of crazy because I'm going to be honest and say I feel like I really don't remember the whole blowing up and getting large thing and Courage having to become giant and Eustace becoming giant. My memory's so fuzzy here, it's just slipping my mind completely, but what I do remember is that carrot. Seeing it with like that army helmet and its big old teeth as it's growing into the wall of Muriel's intestine or stomach or whatever. But yeah, other than the carrot, I don't really remember much, and to be honest, this episode's it's kind of weird. Let's just put that out there. This episode is very odd. But yeah, it came out on October 11th of 2002, and it was paired with one called Profiles in Courage. This one would see Muriel, Eustace, and Courage visiting the Nowhere Fair, where a silhouette maker in one of the booths ends up making some silhouettes for Eustace and Muriel. They end up taking them home and hanging them on the wall of the farmhouse when the silhouettes end up gaining a life of their own and trying to take over Muriel and Eustace. Courage ends up having to save Eustace and Muriel and show these pieces of paper the joy of existing as paper. And at that, if there was ever a pair of episodes that I'm confident I only saw one time, I think it would be these episodes. This is all just so foreign to me, and I'm not sure if I really remember this all too much, but it sounds vaguely familiar. The episode that came after this, though, would be one that kind of changed everything for this series. This episode on October 18th of 2002, called The Mask, would be one with a completely different tone than any other episode we have seen before. This is the one where that lady in the mask with a mysterious and secretive past shows up out of nowhere at the farm, and they end up welcoming her in to stay with them. Along the way, Courage realizes that this is actually a cat underneath the mask who's on the run from an evil dog who had taken her girlfriend, Bunny, hostage. It's a really intense episode that touches on subjects like domestic violence, as well as LGBTQ relationships, and many, many different aspects of adult life. This one would be another double-length episode, and in my opinion, it may have been the best of all the double-length episodes. This one had a lot of emotion put into it, and there was a lot of depth to the story. And naturally, this big emotional episode was followed up by a really silly one called Squatting Tiger Hidden Dog. This one sees an evil empress in China sitting on her throne, who just so happens to be the aunt of Dai Lung. She tells him that her life force is draining, which I guess is given to her by some magic silkworm. The only way she can continue her already really long life and keep her life force from draining would be to become one with the magic silkworm again, and the only way she can do that is by getting the bones of a person with a pure, kind heart. And of course, it just so happens that Eustace, Muriel, and Courage are on vacation at the Great Wall of China right now, so Dai Lung ends up trying to capture Muriel so that his aunt can have her bones. I definitely remember this one, and it was a really odd episode that comes to an end with Eustace having his legs eaten by some giant tiger. I liked this one, and especially the episode that ended up being paired with it, none other than Muted Muriel. This episode, which came out on October 25th of 2002, would see Muriel giving Eustace the silent treatment because he's being a massive jerk to her. Courage ends up being upset that Muriel won't talk to anybody at all, so he goes to Shirley for help, who ends up summoning a giant starfish coming to eat both of them if they don't forgive one another. Or if Muriel doesn't forgive Eustace and start talking, and you get what I'm trying to say. This one was a really creepy episode for me, especially because of that giant starfish and the way they drew it coming to attack the city. It just, it sparks a really weird sense of ick that's very, very particular. After that one, though, oddly enough, on the same day, October 25th, 2002, we would end up seeing the premiere of another pair of episodes, the first of which being Aqua Farmer. This would be the one where Eustace ends up forming a rivalry with a performing dolphin at a sea park, and Courage has to help him go up against this dolphin, which ends up being a big old cheater. Regardless of his cheating, though, at the end, Eustace actually ends up being a winner and is the victor of the race. It's interesting to say that this was one of the few episodes where Eustace actually wins, and at the end, nothing super bad happens to him. He just ends up swimming around in a giant tank in the living room, not really having anybody to race up against anymore. We would see this episode premiere alongside one called Food of the Dragon, which would see Courage having to save his family from a grumpy old dragon who can't even fly, but is trying to attack their family and eat them. Interestingly enough, though, in the end, it's revealed that this flying dragon isn't actually a flying dragon at all, and that it's actually a water dragon. And at that, this water dragon realizes that that's probably why he's always hated eating people. It was a really weird episode, but it was a good one nevertheless. The one that followed it up, though, it would be an episode that just tore at the heartstrings of the entire audience. None other than Last of the Star Makers. I definitely made a video about this one once upon a time, and it was one of the most emotional videos that I've made up to this point. It revolves around two squids up in the sky that are responsible for birthing the stars all around us. These two are the last beings of their kind, and there's a predator chasing them down. The husband Star Maker ends up sacrificing himself for the wife Star Maker and sending her to Earth where she can plant their eggs and birth new Star Makers. Courage and Muriel, of course, are happy to assist in the whole process and keep her safe. Meanwhile, Eustace wants to sell her to the government for money. This one, without a doubt, is one of the saddest episodes of the entire series, from the way they drew the Star Makers and their sad eyes, all the way down to their story and Muriel wanting to protect them alongside Courage. It's overall just a really breathtaking episode, and it's one of those that if you haven't seen it in a long time, I really recommend a rewatch. Just maybe grab the tissues because it'll make you shed a tear or two. This episode premiered on November 1st of 2002 alongside an episode called The Son of the Chicken from Outer Space, which yet again is another awesome full circle moment for this series. This one would see a mysterious spaceship landing near the nowhere farmhouse when a three-headed chicken pops out of it, revealing itself to be the son of the space chicken that used to terrorize Courage. And of course, he's there to finish the battle that his father had begun. Hilariously enough, too, this three-headed chicken was sent there by the old dead space chicken's wife, wanting it to get revenge for ending its father's life. It's a silly episode, and it's honestly funny looking at, like, the Wikipedia page for this, because the trivia is just like, oh, it could be a reference to Ed, Edd n Eddy. Oh, it could be a reference to the Three Stooges. And I'm like, yeah, it could probably be a reference to a lot of things, or maybe it's just a three-headed chicken that was meant to be its own thing and isn't meant to be drawn to conclusions of anything else. I don't know. The Wikipedia trivia section is always fucking hilarious to me because it's full of all sorts of, oh, it could be this, oh, it could be that, but like little to no like actual lines connecting the dots to those theories. Don't get me wrong, sometimes people will actually put legitimate things that could be seen as proof, and then there's other ones where it's like, oh yeah, this is a three-headed chicken and their three heads have different expressions. It's probably in reference to Dodrio from Pokemon. I don't know. Regardless though, the next episode would be none other than Courageous Cure. This one would feature two aliens discovering that their race is becoming extinct because of this deadly disease, so they decide to abduct the Bag family and use them as test subjects to try to get their antibodies and fight off this disease killing off their species. This is an episode that I vaguely remember, but I think I also get it mixed up with some other episodes because there honestly were quite a few where Muriel ends up being captured and trying to take something from her to fix the person capturing her. That's kind of an overall constant theme of this show, and a lot of those episodes start to bleed into one another. This episode premiered on November 8th of 2002 alongside a really iconic episode from the series known as Ball of Revenge. This would be the one where Eustace finally gets fed up with his jealousy of Courage from getting all the attention, so he decides to rally a group of all of Courage's past foes and bring them together to try to beat him once and for all. This one was really cool because we would see the gathering of villains like Cats, the Black Puddle Queen, the Weremole, LaQuack, the Cajun Fox, the Big Toe, the Duck Brothers, all of which were there working with Eustace to try and stop Courage. It's a great episode that, if I recall correctly, comes down to a pretty hardcore game of dodgeball. And for me, my favorite part of this whole episode had to have been the halftime show performed by the Duck Brothers, who hilariously sound like Ringo Starr. It was a great episode for sure. After that one, though, we would be treated to Cabaret Courage, which would see the family taking a trip to Hollywood and having them encounter a showbiz-hating monster that has an unseen aching pain within it. Yeah, basically this one kind of revolves around this guy wanting to recruit performers for his venue, but along the way he gets so disgusted with people's greed and willingness to sell their souls for fame that he develops a pretty gnarly ulcer in his stomach. This is another really bizarro episode, and it definitely says a lot about the pursuit of fame and celebrity status and the sacrifices that come along with that. This episode, having aired on November 15th of 2002, came out alongside Wrath of the Librarian, which sees Courage failing to return a library book on time. As a result, Eustace and Muriel end up being turned into the book's main characters until Courage can pay his late fees. The episode sees him trying to make money to set them free. And interestingly enough, again, I feel like I don't remember this episode. It's so weird. A lot of this is just so foggy, and I feel like it comes from a particular part of my childhood where, like, I was leaving behind the Cartoon Network cartoons and becoming more fond of Nickelodeon cartoons. With that being said, though, this was one of the last few episodes of the series. The next one would come out on November 22nd of 2002, and it would be none other than Remembrance of Courage Past. This episode feels like one that I'm pretty sure they knew was going to be one of the last episodes, and as a result, it was meant to close a lot of doors and answer a lot of questions. This episode sees Courage traumatized and recounting the memory of what happened to his parents, remembering him being a pup and them being taken by a veterinarian and sent off to space while he was just dumped in the alleyway outside of the vet's office. Because Courage is going through so much and seems to be off, they end up taking him to the vet. Of course, the same exact vet that sent Courage's parents to space. This one tells the story of what happened to them, how much they loved Courage, and how unfortunate and heartbreaking it was for them to be sent away by this crazy veterinarian who still to this day is sending dogs to space. Thankfully, in the end, Courage ends up getting revenge for his parents, sending the vet to the moon instead, and having all the dogs on the moon that he sent there attack him. It was a real heartbreaker of an episode, and I feel like it was excellent to be the second to last episode because it was one that didn't necessarily come with some huge life lesson about accepting yourself or anything like that. It came with a big lesson about processing trauma, moving on from hardships in your life, and being thankful for the things that you have. And at the same exact time, answering all of the questions we had about Courage and his life before Muriel and Eustace. It wasn't about having a big, heartfelt lesson about self-discovery or anything like that. It was more about closing up the circle and ending the story of how Courage had gotten here. Nah, dude, that deep, genuine life lesson about self-acceptance would be saved for the very last episode. None other than perfect. This episode sees Courage feeling insecure and out of place because of all of his perfections and the mistakes that he's been making. At that, in an effort to get him to be a better dog and be more perfect, Eustace calls a teacher, who ends up just being this ghostly old school teacher who abuses him in the attic in an effort to try to make him her version of perfect. Of course, Courage ends up learning that his differences aren't what makes him imperfect, and that nobody in the world is this lady's definition of perfect, and that as a matter of fact, everyone she judges is perfect just the way that they are. It all comes to a really heartfelt climax when we see Courage in the bathroom being talked to by a mysterious fish that just appears in the tub out of nowhere to tell him about how important he is and how he's perfect just the way that he is. And honestly, I can't stress just how perfect this was to end the entire series as a whole. This entire show revolved around this scared dog having to step up to the plate and be the dog that he needed to be to defend these people who accepted him as one of their own. Or at least Muriel. I don't know. Fuck Eustace. But it just makes so much sense that the very final episode feels like it would be the one to prove that he isn't cowardly at all, and that Courage actually lives up to his name, and that he's a lot more than his own perceptions of himself and his own self-doubt define him as. Personally, I love this episode, and I know a lot of people remember it for how freaky it was and that CGI whole sequence with the, trumpet thing, but I mean, sure, that was freaky. However, what stuck with me personally a lot more was the overall message of it, especially that scene with Courage and that fish at the end. It's something that I feel like a lot of kids who grew up watching this show and feeling scared needed to hear. This episode could have gone out with a bang with one of the most terrifying scenes that anyone had ever seen and a really haunting and chilling story to live up to its original horror roots. But instead, it focused on Courage, having courage, and being the best version of himself, no matter what that looked like. And as kids who were finding ourselves at the time, that felt like a really important lesson to learn. Now, I almost thought about not including this, but I figured, why not? After the main series in November of 2014, we would actually get an episode that was meant to be kind of an attempt at a reboot. This short, called The Fog of Courage, was directed by, written by, and storyboarded by John R. Dilworth himself, and it proved to be a kind of hopeful pilot, but sadly it didn't ever result in an actual reboot of Courage. I did make a video about this one a few years back though, and it turned out pretty good if I do say so myself. This one sees Courage finding a mysterious amulet while he's digging through the yard, and when he does, a ghostly fog covers the farm. It's angry and wants the amulet back because apparently it belonged to the Fog Ghost's long-lost love, and Eustace, of course, doesn't want to give the amulet back in classic Eustace form. It was actually really good, and in my opinion, it felt a lot like an original Courage the Cowardly Dog short, just with a completely new and updated art style. It's crazy to say that this one actually never made it to the airwaves here in the United States as well. John R. Dilworth was directly approached by an executive from Cartoon Network Asia who was a big fan of the series and really wanted this kind of special to come to fruition, and he did produce it, although he wasn't a big fan of the CGI and said it was a bit of a challenge. However, he didn't mind obliging what the network had wanted. In this one, we would see none other than Wallace Shawn doing the voice of Eustace, and honestly, it felt like a really fitting role. I wasn't too upset about that one. I'm not too sure how readily available that this short is on the internet nowadays, but if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend looking for it because this was a really good episode and it gave me a lot of hope for a reboot, but sadly, that wouldn't have ever happened. Even though it wouldn't get rebooted, though, that doesn't negate how legendary of a show that Courage the Cowardly Dog was. I mean, this one left such a massive, lasting effect on all of our childhoods, and for me personally, it's a show that I will always hold in high regard, and it's one that'll always hold a special place in my heart. The late 90s and early 2000s for Cartoon Network were just such a special time, and it's one of those where you had to be there. Like, don't get me wrong, modern Cartoon Network is cool. Like, I love Steven Universe, Adventure Time, shows like that. Which, man, it's crazy to say those aren't really modern. Those are shows from like 10 years ago. But still, even then, that can't compare to what Cartoon Network was once upon a time back in the good old days. With that being said, though, I mean, things change. As time goes on, the sky's the limit for the network, too. So, hey, they could go back to being one of the best networks in the cartoon game at this point, but, I wouldn't hold my breath for it, to be honest. With that being said, though, friends, I'm really glad I got to take the time to talk about every episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog today, because not only did it remind me of some of my favorite episodes, but on top of that, it also reminded me of some that I hadn't remembered. There really is nothing quite like a nostalgic walk down memory lane, my friends, but before we bring the first episode of Dreaming with Dusk to a close, I thought it'd be fun to do something a little different and give you guys a recommendation. Just for a little context, though, there's something I find kind of interesting. On the back end of YouTube's analytics, it shows me what my audience, on average, searches for a lot and what a lot of their interests are, right? And it's super cool to realize that a lot of my audience is into metal and rock music. Which, I mean, that kind of makes sense. I don't know, the OG design for Giraffe Sean had a Lorna Shore t-shirt on, and his current version has a Sabella t-shirt, which, I don't know. It's cool. I like putting my own little touches of my own personal taste into my character. And to see that I share that taste with a lot of my audience is actually pretty sick. But at that, I thought it'd be cool for this episode to give you guys a little music recommendation, right? So this week's recommendation is a little compilation called Everlasting by Sabella. Now, if you've never heard of Sabella before, it's kind of hard for me to put it into words because I'm not some like genre elitist, but it's like that peak 2010s Facebook beatdown, right? That down-tempo, like, end-of-the-world sounding breakdown with just some angry dude just letting it all out over it all. It's just such a perfect degree of controlled chaos with just such an emotional outburst at the same time, and I'm personally a sucker for this band, dude. The very first time that I saw them live was back in 2017. They were on the road with a little band called Traders, and I saw them at a venue in Portland, Oregon. I believe it was the Analog Theater, but I'm not too sure. I feel like the venues in Portland like come and go and change names all the time, other than like the Roseland or the Hawthorne. Shout out to Club Satyricon, by the way. God, that was just such a staple at the Portland scene back in like 2010. And obviously long before that, but I mean, come on, that like 2010 deathcore back then was so cool. But yeah, that was the first time I saw them, and I was just hooked. I had never heard of them before, but after that show, I immediately went home and looked up some of their music, and I was just dumbfounded. The last time I saw them was in 2024. I drove all the way to Chicago for their album release show for the album Easy, which, oh God, 10 out of 10. If you haven't heard that one, I highly recommend that as well. But Everlasting is specifically a compilation of all their early like singles and EPs. Sabella's a really weird band that's like one time and final. Like Dog Days they pressed on like CD and cassette and never really did any represses. They did it through vinyl as well, but again that was one and done. They're like put it out once and it's final and that's it. Which I kind of like that. It makes things a little mysterious, you know. It also makes a lot of their merch highly coveted, of course, because there's not a lot of it out there. So a lot of this stuff was put out on like CD and tape a really long time ago, and of course uploaded here to YouTube where you can easily find it, but not a lot of physical media is out there. This compilation, though, it's completely remastered, all their early music remastered by a dude named Zach over at Third Eye Studios. They had a record drop by Wax Vessel, which sold out super quick. However, up on the Wax Vessel Bandcamp, you can listen to this album in most of its entirety. I guess there might be a other half of the record that's going to be like vinyl exclusive, but the portion that is up on Bandcamp, dude, is so fucking sick. 10 out of 10 recommend. But yeah, that's a look at the band on Giraffe Sean's shirt. If you are interested in hearing a little more about it, I definitely recommend looking into them online. And yeah, shout out Sabella for being one of my favorite bands. At that, though, as far as future recommendations go, I don't want to keep it just to music. I'm happy to recommend movies, whatever shows I'm watching at the time, you know, video games, stuff like that. I thought it'd be sick to start with music, though, because it's something that I am personally super passionate about. Outside of that, though, my friends, I really want to thank you so much for tuning into the Dreaming with Dusk podcast. This is episode 1, and of course, I want to refine things a little bit more in the future, but I don't know, this is just a taste of what to expect going forward. If you made it this far, I would love it if you'd let me know down in the comments below what your favorite Courage the Cowardly Dog villain is. I do have one massive rule, though. You cannot choose Freaky Fred or King Ramses. Those two are off limits. They are too commonly brought up. Way too much of a normie, generic answer. I want something good. Give me a deep cut villain, man. Who do you like? I'm going to do everything I can to go into the comments and look for those specifically and respond to them. I've been honestly struggling with the idea of even looking at any comments, messages, or anything like that. Not even as it pertains to Dusk Till Sean at all. Even in my personal life, dude. I'm having such a weird anxiety, hard time reaching out to people and responding other than my like wife and immediate family, but I don't know, I'm working past it and I really want to be more engaged in the comments. So it'd mean a lot to me if you'd let me know what your favorite villain is, and I will look for those comments in particular, because if you made it this far, that tells me that you're a true fan and that I can look at your comments and respond to you without having stupid anxiety about it for literally no reason whatsoever. I don't know. I know you're not going to be hate watching if you listen this far. If you were hate listening, you probably would have left a long time ago. But yeah, I want to thank you so much again if you made it this far, my friend. This has been episode 1 of the Dreaming with Dusk podcast, and I'm really excited to see what future episodes hold and what topics I feel like covering. Feel free to make some suggestions down in the comments below if there's anything you'd like to see a podcast dedicated to. And other than that, I hope that you have an excellent day, my friend. Again, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. I'll talk to you soon.